Bills Mafia. On tonight's Air Raid Hour, we will be breaking down the NFL Scouting Combine. Our focus will be on offensive prospects and how they fared in Indianapolis. But first,
welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour presented by Picasso's Pizza and the Cover One Sports Network. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at the Bills Guys, joined as always by my co-host Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tilt Money. This evening, we are breaking down the offensive prospects from Indianapolis. And by offensive prospects, Dave, I mean, we're going to be spending about 30 minutes on wide receivers because, man, there was a whole bunch of storylines from Indianapolis on the wide receivers. But before we do, I have one quarterback I want to throw out there. You know, I know the talk of Indy was Sam Hartman and his hair, was J.J. McCarthy and him rising up the draft boards, was Caleb Williams in his interviews. But I think one of the quarterbacks flying under the radar in this draft cycle is Kedon Slovis out of BYU. He went from USC, highly sought after recruit, had a really good freshman year, injuries and other things sort of happened. He transferred to Pitt. Then he's now at BYU. I think he's got a pretty live arm. I think he's got a ton of snaps in college. He is the one guy, pretty good size, 6'2", 215. He is the one guy on day 3 that I am pretty much in on. So Kedon Slovis, I want to get that name out there before anyone else tries to steal it from me. Kedon Slovis out of BYU.
And it is nice, right, when we don't have to worry about quarterback in the draft, isn't it? Though, I mean, everyone talks about it, but it's like you say that about Slovis, and I imagine that there's going to be a lot of these teams, like the Bills or teams with established star type quarterbacks that are maybe looking to churn over their backup situation, that wouldn't mind taking a guy like Slovis in day 3 and kind of having him be kind of the working man's backup there to develop. So not a bad idea.
And I'll tell you what, we're not going to spend a lot of time on offensive line today, but watching yesterday's scouting combine coverage in the offensive line, this is an historic offensive tackle class. So imagine if this was another year where the Buffalo Bills needed an offensive tackle. We'd be spending 40 minutes on the offensive tackles that worked out on Sunday in Indy. But fortunately for the Buffalo Bills, even though we have 2 pending UFAs in Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown, we're just going to talk about some of those 3rd round, 4th round, late round guys today. But before we do, we got to start with wide receivers. And before we start with wide receivers, we got to get in our Picasso's Pizza ad here. The show is sponsored by Picasso's Pizza, 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can have it mailed to your home. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right, Dave, let's get on to our wide receiver conversation here. Again, thank you to Ryan Talbot from NY Up for supplying us with the names, sourced names of all the people who have met with the Buffalo Bills. This is not an exclusive list. There are probably dozens of names that met with the Buffalo Bills that are not being reported, but the ones that we do know, Troy Franklin out of Oregon, Keon Coleman out of FSU, Tez Walker out of UNC, Xavier Worthy out of Texas, Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU, Jalen McMillan out of Washington, Adonai Mitchell out of Texas, Xavier Legette out of South Carolina, Roman Wilson out of Michigan, and Johnny Wilson out of Florida State. It was very clear watching the broadcast on Saturday that this is a historic wide receiver class. Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, they will not get close to the Buffalo Bills pick at 28. Probably not even close enough for us to consider a trade up. Let's start our conversation this evening with Brian Thomas Jr. I think he joined that list of guys that are probably going to be out of reach for the Buffalo Bills. 6'3", 209 pounds, 4.33 40. Really stuck out. I know he's raw, but his ceiling is absolutely ridiculous.
ceiling's ridiculous. And, everyone talks about the 17 touchdowns from last year and his 17.3 yards per catch, and did everything and more, in my opinion, of what he needed to do testing wise. I think there was a pretty decent contingent of Bills fans that thought there was a pretty realistic chance, and maybe there is, right? Maybe there is. We don't know. I think it's a less likely chance now that he's available. I'll say when
15% is probably where I'd probably put it at.
I think maybe you were thinking like 25 or a third percent before this that he could potentially slip his way down to pick 28. But I think now someone is just going to be too enamored with that size and that speed, even with the 1 year production. However, that program lately, and when I say lately, I mean the last 5-7 years, has been really good at putting out wide receivers. Now, there's some iffy ones in that group. Terrace Marshall, we don't know, like others like that. But for the guy that was the running mate there for Neighbors, I mean, he deserves a lot of attention.
Yeah, I agree. So let's move on now to some of the other guys who might be possibilities for the Buffalo Bills at pick number 28. Let's start with Xavier Worthy. 5'11", 165, which was concerning to everyone, but then everyone sort of forgot about it when he broke the NFL record with a 4.21 40. And I think he made a lot of fans, both in the general public and in NFL front offices, when he ran a 4.25, but then he's like, no, I'm not going to stand on that. I'm going to go for the record. And then he came out and tied the record, but that was unofficial. And then the official one was actually the record with a 4.21. I know he's going to get the John Ross comp, but he is not John Ross. This is a guy who's a polished route runner. He understands how to control his speed, which is stupid dangerous. Like guys like Tyreek Hill have mastered not just being fast, but controlling that speed and the stopping and the starting. Xavier Worthy can do that with his speed, which is just so dangerous. Reception Perception, which is a great follow on social media, a great website, a great podcast. They said to think about Xavier Worthy as like a Hollywood Brown plus. So like a guy who has a similar stature to Hollywood Brown, who's been there, done that in this league, but can probably be better than Hollywood Brown. A lot of Cover One fans of Xavier Worthy. Proanth is a huge fan. Chris Coos is a huge fan. I'll tell you what, if despite the size, 5'11", 165, despite the fact that he's probably not an every down boundary receiver, even though he's taken most of his snaps on the boundary in college, despite the fact that he probably can't do a lot of what the Buffalo Bills want to do in the run game, etc. If he's on the board at 28, I'm game.
I think a lot of people are game now after what happened this weekend. Nate, Geary, Greg, Aaron, I mean, everybody under the sun, I feel like, is game now for Xavier Worthy after what he did at the combine. And I think what it does is it kind of just makes you go back and watch what he really did at Texas, right? And you see the speed on the field, right? This is not just a guy, like you said, who's a straight line runner. He obviously has the straight line speed, but the route running, the ability to play inside and out, the ability to stop and start. And I think that's where you really need to kind of control the speed, right? As you put it. And like when Tyreek Hill, and I'm not saying he's Tyreek Hill, but when Tyreek Hill is gliding across the field, he already looks like he's going fast, and then he hits another gear, and then he can stop on a dime. Like that's the type of stuff that when you combine that speed with the route running ability, you become a really special player, right? And it would be maybe against the grain a bit for what the perceived need the Bills have is, which is kind of like that down the field stretching, go up and get it type of guy. He's not necessarily that per se, but a weapon, right? And a weapon of that caliber is something that I'll never complain about adding to this offense. So yeah, I'm game too.
So Xavier Worthy, he's got that rubber stamp. On now to Adonai Mitchell, 6'2", 209 pounds. He was Worthy's teammate at Texas, Georgia transfer. 4.3, 4.40 at that size was absolutely insane. The ceiling is there for Adonai Mitchell. He made some big plays in big games at both Georgia and Texas. He gets a lot of CeeDee Lamb comps, which I think is insanely unfair. The agility of CeeDee Lamb was historic, elite, off the charts. You don't even remotely see that from AD Mitchell. And AD Mitchell might not even have sort of the slot versatility that a guy like CeeDee Lamb has had in the National Football League. To me, AD Mitchell looks like a 2-inch shorter, 10-pound lighter, 0.3 second faster T. Higgins. That's the kind of wide receiver I think he's going to be, even though he's got more speed. The floor for him and a guy he compares to a lot athletically is DJ Chark, who's had some success when healthy in the National Football League. The ceiling for AD Mitchell is there. I understand he made some comments the day before they worked out that were very unpopular with people, talking about how he doesn't always run full speed on all of his routes. Listen, even if that's true, and even there's a reason for that, like the route's not coming, the ball's not coming to you, etc., like whatever, you don't verbalize that to people. That's just not something you do, Adonai, not a smart thing. But the ceiling for days, I'm on board with him at 28 if he's even there after his testing. I think there's no shot the Bills have at him in the second round. So AD Mitchell at 28, book it for me. I'm on board.
I'd be willing to take the chance. I think that there's some perception out there that he is not that great at tracking the ball. From what I saw, he looked pretty good at tracking the ball from the games I watched.
His high pointing is great too.
So the speed is there, obviously, and you look at him and you say that's a guy that could fit what the Bills could use, right? Which is a downfield sort of legitimate number 2 option. I don't know if AD Mitchell will ever be necessarily a number 1 receiver in the league, but I could get on board with taking him because I think he is a fit for what the Bills could use in their offense, right? Which is a downfield threat. And that's really what he is, right? At the end of the day. So for me, like, I would be on board. I think I would still take Worthy over Mitchell, all things equal, just given the completeness of Worthy's game. But AD Mitchell certainly sold himself to a lot of teams probably this weekend, is at least athletically, right? The interviews, we don't know what necessarily happened behind closed doors in some of these, but maybe he cleaned that up. Maybe he clarified what he meant, probably did. That size, that speed, it's there. And man, I don't know. I think, I don't know, 28, but he's definitely not going to be there in the second round.
There's a floor with AD Mitchell, I think, that's a little scarier than other people's floors. A name that comes to mind to me, especially because one of the things that the combine doesn't show you that Adonai Mitchell struggles with is cornerbacks who are physical with him, which you're going to see a lot of in the National Football League, especially in the postseason in the National Football League. I mean, floor could be like a Justin Hunter, who was an absolute bust coming out of Tennessee, right? Who eventually played for the Buffalo Bills and for some reason caught like 5 touchdowns from Tyrod that one year. But that was like the highlight of his career. Like, so a guy like Justin Hunter is a floor for a guy like AD Mitchell. So that's the concerning part, right? So we talked about Chop Robinson yesterday, having, a pretty concerning floor. I think AD Mitchell has probably one of the lower floors of the guys in this draft class. And that's scary, but he's also got a very, very high ceiling as well. So I'm on board. If the Buffalo Bills think it's okay, I think it's okay at this point. I'm not going to sit here and be mad about it. I don't think I feel that strongly about it. On to Troy Franklin. He was underwhelming, still clocked in at not clocked in, but measured in at 6'2". Here was the concerning thing with him. 176. Like, he came in a lot lighter than he was listed in college. A lot of people were like, well, he did it because he wants to test better. Well, 4'4", 140 is good, but for him, if you're losing 10 pounds, you're expecting maybe he runs closer to a 4.2s, low 4.3. So to run a 4.41 is still very good, but it's a little underwhelming. To me, Troy Franklin, he checked the boxes for me. But at the end of the day, I'm no longer willing to spend maybe a first-round pick on Troy Franklin. I don't think he's a first-round pick. I don't think NFL GMs view Troy Franklin as a first-round pick. If we were to take him at 28, okay, but I doubt we do. There's going to be other more tempting options there. At 60, to me, I think he now becomes totally in play. He's a vertical field stretching boundary type. His profile analytically is very similar to Jameson Williams. Kind of get some John Brown vibes, kind of get some Darius Slayton vibes as a sort of floor for a Troy Franklin, which is still pretty good because Slayton's had some good years in the National Football League. All of that complements what the Bills have. It allows Dalton Kincaid to do things. It allows James Cook to do things. It allows Khalil Shakir to do things. But to me, he's not a future number 1. He's a vertical threat. I just I don't think I want to spend pick 28 on him. Pick 60 is where I think is a sweet spot for Troy Franklin.
Yeah, and as we're gonna talk about some of these other guys, like who knows? He could be there by pick 60.
Mhm.
And I mean, I don't think he will, but I mean, for me, he was definitely on a weekend where generally the wide receivers shined and kind of stole the show, right, of the combine.
Mhm.
And really mostly all of them tested really, really well. Like he was a little bit of a stock down guy for me, right? After the measurements. And I think
Mhm.
that's look, it doesn't take away from what he did on the field, and it doesn't take away from a lot of the things like John Helmkamp and others have been saying about his tape. But if you are okay with the fact that he's probably only ever going to be your number 2 receiver and that's all he's going to be, but you feel like he's like a perfect fit for what you need to do for the next
Mhm.
3 to 4 years while Stephon Diggs is still on this team, then okay, like I'd rather take Mitchell or Worthy, or honestly, I'd rather even take Lad McConkey, who we're going to talk about here in a second, over Troy Franklin.
Mhm.
Personally,
E
that's my
even if
that
we
my
do use pick
pick.
28, I won't be mad because, like I said, he compliment. I'll be maybe a tinge disappointed, but I'll be like, "All right, the Bills must really see him as a fit, someone who can open up some things." Like maybe Joe Brady wants to get more vertical in this offense. We didn't see a lot of verticality from this offense with Joe Brady. Maybe he felt like his hands were tied because of personnel, and he feels like Troy Franklin is a perfect fit. If he
Right,
does, and they pick him at 28, whatever. Like I'll
right.
be fine with it. But when you watch that combine, it became evidently clear Troy Franklin is a vertical threat, and I don't know if he's gonna be much more than a vertical threat or sort of like a underneath like gadget type of like screen pass guy because his gauntlet was awful.
Yep.
Troy Franklin had the worst gauntlet I think I've ever seen. He was zigging, he was zagging, he couldn't hold a straight line. That might be that might be hyperbolic saying it was the worst I've ever seen because there's some guys who've dropped balls and things like that. But when you watched Keon Coleman and Lad McConkey and guys like Ricky Pearsall run their gauntlet into that super straight line, catching everything in stride, and you just saw Troy Franklin zigging and zagging, you realize like, yeah, this dude likes to go vertical. He's probably not going to be the best like going over the middle of the field and things like that. So Troy Franklin, I think, showed his true colors. He's got a trick. It's a very good trick, but it's
Mhm.
just one, and that's getting downfield.
Yeah, and again, like you said, if that's what the Bills want right now and that's all they
Mhm.
expect out of him, fine, but to me, is it worth that pick at pick 28? I don't think so personally.
Keon Coleman was a very polarizing figure at the
Yeah.
combine. 6'3", 213 pounds. It was the 4'6", 140 that got everyone like in their feelings, myself included. I jokingly tweeted like, this dude just moved himself into like the third round. Hyperbolic statement on my part on social media. I think he's going to clean up his 4.61 in his pro day, run somewhere in the 4.5s. I think he had an excellent gauntlet drill. He clocked over 20 miles an hour. I think it was really good gauntlet up until that last ball that he kind of bobbled a little bit and then went out of bounds. But he really showed that his game speed is faster than his track speed and that he does have something and he can provide something to you as a day 2 wide receiver. He might not be the contested catch artist that Allen Robinson was coming out, but if you put Keon Coleman's Raz and his athletic profile up against Allen Robinson's, it's practically a mirror image of one another. And Allen Robinson was a very productive receiver in this league for a long time. You can be successful in this league and not be a natural separator. Michael Thomas is very good. What is a natural separator? Puka Nacua set all kind of records, is not a natural separator. I like Coleman. I still like Keon Coleman, but for the Bills, I'd pass.
I just wonder what like we're talking about Troy Franklin and him being like a fit for potentially for what the Bills would want to
Mhm,
do vertically opposite of Stephon Diggs. Like I just don't know what the plan would be with
mhm,
Coleman, and that's where I'm struggling because I like him, and I
yeah,
think that he probably gets a little bit unfairly judged for that 40 time, like you said. The gauntlet was great. His ability to get to top speed with the football in his hands and like on the field, that's impressive. Obviously, we know about his yards after catch ability, but uh, like to me, Coleman's a perfect example of like tape's better than the testing, but I just don't know what the plan would be if you're the Bills and you draft him. And that's my only reservation really of him for the Bills, right, is like I like the player. I do think he's probably a second round
Yeah.
type of guy to me, but I just don't know
Yeah.
what the Bills' plan would be for him.
The next two guys up, and I'll tell you what, this might have been the most eye-opening thing from the combine, and maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe I'm letting some of the bias that we all joke about get to my head a little bit, but Lad McConkey and Ricky Pearsall,
Mm.
when they put their testing numbers up against Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, and they're pretty much the same exact athlete, that blew my mind. I get it, right? Like maybe I'm racist, that white black thing, right? Like I don't like it. Still shocked the hell out of me when I saw Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave lined up against Lad McConkey and Ricky Pearsall, and it was like legitimately identical. To me, Lad, if you want him, you're going to have to take him at 28 because the Chiefs are going to take him at 30 or 2. And he might not be there at 60. And Ricky Pearsall, I don't think will be there at 60 either. Now, I don't think Ricky Pearsall is going to be a first rounder. So I'd be on board with Ricky Pearsall if it was a trade back from 28 or a trade up from 60. So I'm on board with Lad McConkey at 28, and I'm on board with a trade back or a trade up for Ricky Pearsall in the second round. I think they both showed me that while they're not perfect, maybe fits for what the Buffalo Bills want, like a pure boundary guy, they can be inside, outside, versatile, and they can complement just fine what the Buffalo Bills have. Lad McConkey's gauntlet was picture perfect. One of the best I've ever seen.
Was I watching a video game watching that
Yeah,
gauntlet?
it
I mean,
was.
like
It was
it
nuts.
looked like a computer simulation,
Mhm.
like watching that. I will say this, like I totally agree with your sentiments. I love the idea of maybe the Bills don't take a wide receiver at 28 and maybe they trade up and get a Pearsall somewhere in the middle of the second round.
Mhm.
To me, I think McConkey fits any team, just by
Yeah.
the way. Like he could go to any team and help them smooth. He's always going to be where he needs to be. Fast, obviously ran the good 40 time 4.39. But
Mhm.
Pearsall to me, vertical, jump ball, the guy that can go up and get it and still had that good shuttle, had that good 40
Yeah.
time. To me, he seems like he would be just maybe a slightly better fit
Mhm.
for the Bills, but that's not I don't think Ricky Pearsall's a better player than Lad McConkey. So I would definitely be on board with either one. I think if, like you said, if you want McConkey, you're gonna have to
Mhm.
take him at 28. The alternative, I think, could be you take someone else at 28, and then maybe you move back up into the middle of the second and take a guy like Pearsall, because I do think
Mhm.
Pearsall will be a second rounder when all is said and done.
The last sort of name I have here, the big ones, is Xavier Legette out of South Carolina. 6'1", 221, obviously huge, chalked up body. Ran a 4.39 40. He's a fifth-year player. It was his first year in college this year, over 30 targets. Despite his being an older prospect, he's still pretty moldable because of that. He was a quarterback who transitioned to wide receiver in college. He had some injuries that he had to deal with, and he finally got healthy by his super senior year. I mean, he's got a 40-inch vert. He's the best high pointer in the draft, period. Like no one can go up and get a ball. Nobody can box you out like Xavier Legette in this draft. He's got AJ Brown's body, but he's faster than AJ Brown, but he's probably got tighter hips, so he's not as versatile as an AJ Brown. I'd be comfortable with Xavier Legette as early as 28 if the Bills decide to do that. I'd also be comfortable with him in the second round if the Buffalo Bills to decide to do that. Xavier Legette is also rubber stamp for me. He's approved. If that's the decision the Bills make at wide receiver, I'm okay with it.
I'm gonna give him my rubber stamp as well, and this comes from the fact that I've watched a lot of South Carolina games this past year. My brother-in-law, Ashley's sister's husband, is a huge South Carolina fan. We know Randy's a
Mhm.
huge South Carolina, so I've been in on Legette for a while. He has really bounced around as far as consensus is concerned. Like during the college season, you saw him as high as maybe like the third or fourth wide receiver in some
Mhm.
rankings. Now maybe he's down around 7, 8, 9 range.
Which will be 3 or 4 any other year.
Exactly. But to me, he gets my rubber stamp.
Mhm.
Like I don't worry so much about the 1 year production with him. I
Mhm.
I do think that that to me tells me there's maybe even a little more to squeeze out of him. Like that would actually be maybe more of a, I would try to be a glass half full guy there and view it more as a positive than a negative. And like you said, high pointer, if that's what you're looking for and what you really need in this offense. And like the comment he made
And the
in
big playability too. Yeah.
the big playability in the comment he made, he's like, oh, Josh Allen like needs a guy who can go up and get it. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like those guys would vibe really well together.
It's something with the Buffalo Bills, like, quite frankly, like, when's the last time we had a high pointer? Like, Justin Hunter, Kelvin Benjamin, like, James Hardy, rest in peace. Like, it's been a while. Like, Eric Moulds was the last legit high point, sort of like go up and get it, climb the ladder type of receiver the Buffalo Bills had, which is saying a lot.
Yes.
Now, I think the argument you make is like, well, that's not the kind of wide receiver Josh Allen needs. He needs guys who can naturally separate, guys who can give him a little cushion, blah, 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 blah. I think Xavier Legette can do both, right? Like, especially if he's still moldable. He's still growing as a receiver. He gets into a wide receiver room with Stephon Diggs. He gets into a wide receiver room with Khalil Shakir. You work with him. I think you can mold him and you can make him into an even better player than he is already. And Randy Hardman, who we mentioned is a huge, huge Gamecocks fan, he made a great comment to me the other day. He was like, Odunze, he's got Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan. Worthy's got AD Mitchell. Like, all of these receivers in this draft class have like another guy that takes pressure off them. Xavier Legette didn't have that at South Carolina. He was the dude. Everyone knew he was the dude, and he still produced in his senior year, the year he finally got more than 30 targets. So that says a lot about Xavier Legette, his ability to collect volume, even though everyone knows where the ball is going. So I think he could end up being one of the steals of this draft when he ultimately goes, either late first or somewhere in the second round. The other two receivers that I want to mention, right? Jalen Polk, he checked the boxes, right? Not a blazing 40 time, but no one was expecting that. If you put Jalen Polk and Jacoby Myers athletic profiles next to each other on RAS, they're practically the same outside the fact that Jalen Polk is just faster, which means Jalen Polk can be an inside guy. He can be an outside guy. Jalen Polk, I think, is one of the more slept on receivers in this draft class. I think he's going to have a really good career. I'd be super comfortable with him at 60. And I think Javon Baker is another guy who checked all the boxes. And if the Bills want him, they'll probably have to take him at 60 as well. So Polk and Baker, I don't want to forget those two, even though we might not go as in depth on them as some of these other guys here tonight.
Yeah, and I've liked Baker for a while. I'm not surprised at the 4.5. I mean, he's not a burner, right? That's just not who he is. He is a body control, athletic contested catch type of player, big average depth of target in college. That's just what he is. So yeah, I think those guys did check the boxes. I agree with you. And man, it is a fun class, and it is historic. A fun but also stressful class to need a wide receiver, because I said it on Twitter yesterday. It's like, man, like all these people have their favorites, and it's like, yes, I agree. I like that guy. And yes, I like that guy. And I'm like, I like all these guys. And I'm like, I need the Bills to get somebody. I need them to get somebody.
And I'll tell you what, like we mentioned, Keon Coleman, not a fit, mixed in with all of these other receivers are guys who I perceive not to be a fit. Roman Wilson had a great combine. I made a prediction on the preview show. I said, we're going to be talking about Roman Wilson as a first rounder after the combine is over. I think I was wrong on that. I think that was a bit of a reach. I kind of forgot how historic this class is. Roman Wilson still tested off the charts good. Yep. And like any other year, I think we would be talking about Roman Wilson as a first rounder. He met with the Bills. I still don't think he's a fit, just like Keon Coleman, who met with the Bills. I don't think he's a fit. I think he's more of a natural slot guy. Malachi Corley just chose not to do anything, stood on his Senior Bowl, but he's sort of that Deebo Samuel sort of yak guy. Again, love Malachi Corley. Just don't think he's a fit with what the Buffalo Bills are looking for. And then Jalen McMillan out of Washington, who's gaining a lot of steam right now. He was injured, but when he was healthy, his tape was phenomenal. But he's taken a majority of his snaps in his career out of the slot. The Bills met with him, but again, a majority of his snaps out of the slot, unless the Buffalo Bills think they can change him. I just don't know about Jalen McMillan as a guy the Buffalo Bills target early, unless something changes in free agency, in which case all four of those guys enter the conversation. But yesterday I did an exercise with the safeties, and I gave you 10 names. And I was like, by the end of the fourth round, the Buffalo Bills just need to leave with one of these 10 guys because I like them all just fine. I want to do that same exercise now with wide receiver, and there's 12 names I have for you here. Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Lad McConkey, Xavier Legette, Jalen Polk, Troy Franklin, Ricky Pearsall, Javon Baker. I just listed 12 names. Obviously, the first 3 are long shots. Not even long shots. They're impossibilities. But by pick 60, Brandon Bean, unless something crazy happens in free agency, by pick 60, one of those 12 guys needs to be a Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, and unless like somehow the Bills are able to get Gabriel Davis back, like somehow, right, with this new cap like
and
I
then
just
Roman Wilson comes into play, and
right,
then Keon Coleman, Malachi Corey, then they come into play.
right. I don't see a scenario where the Bills leave free agency in a situation where they still don't need a wide receiver, right? In the top 60 picks. Like, even if they are able to sign, let's say they are able to re-sign Gabe Davis, does that mean they still don't need? Yes, they still do need a receiver. They still need to draft a receiver. Maybe that becomes Roman Wilson then, and maybe you have like a Roman Wilson, Khalil Shakir situation. Like, I don't know. I still feel like they need to come out of the top, top 60 with one of those guys. I agree with you.
Some other names to mention that maybe could be part of that 12. They're not part of my 12, but they could be part of that 12. Tez Walker, we like to shout on him after the combine because he didn't have, or not combine, after the Senior Bowl, because he didn't have the greatest Senior Bowl, but he blew up Indy athletically, running in the 4.3s at his size. He met with the Bills. So Tez Walker could very well be a part of Brandon Bean's list. So that's a name to know. He had a good combine. Even though he had a bad Senior Bowl, he had a good combine. Son of Jerry Rice, Brendan Rice. He checked the boxes at the combine, sort of fits the mold of a boundary receiver the Buffalo Bills are looking for. I'm not high on him, but I know other people like Bruce Exclusive are pretty high on him. Jermaine Burton had a great combine. He gives me Kenny Stills vibes. He ran very well. And Jamari Thrash, again, played a lot on the boundary at Louisville, but at his size, maybe he's more of an inside guy. He kind of gives me some John Brown vibes. I really like Jamari Thrash. Maybe he's in Brandon Bean's top 12 or top 15 list. Those are 4 guys that are also, I think, in contention, but they're certainly not as high on my list as the 12 that I mentioned before.
Yeah, I agree. You love Jermaine Burton's hands, one of the lowest drop rates in college football. Only 4 drops in his career, only 0 drops last year. Jamari Thrash had the dropsies at the Senior Bowl. I know that, but I do like some of the tape that Anthony had kind of like put out on him around some of his route running looked pretty solid, but I'm with you on Rice. Like I'm not as high on him as a lot of people, and Tez Walker like seems to be getting just gets shit on by a lot of people. And, like it's like maybe unfair, but also he's a UNC guy, so maybe it is fair. But yeah, the fact that he did meet with the Bills and we know about it, what was the one year the Bills met with like Daz Newsome and I forgot who the other Carolina receiver was that year. Like, was it Diami Brown?
Yeah,
they met with as well. So they're familiar with the ACC, that's for sure.
Speaking of the ACC, let's talk about some other players that maybe shined or you might have on your list if the Buffalo Bills were looking to say double dip at wide receiver. A guy I think would be higher most years, and I still think he's going to go relatively high, Malik Washington. If you put up Malik Washington's RAS next to Zay Flowers, their athletic profiles are like the same. And Malik Washington blew up the Shrine Bowl. He had a really good senior year. He needs to prove it more down the field because he was used sort of underneath in college. He really wasn't given the opportunity to do a lot of stuff downfield. He's got to prove it more at the catch point. He wasn't given that opportunity in college, but Malik Washington, very similar to Zay Flowers. I think he would be a massive, like double dip type of guy the Buffalo Bills could go for. Taj Washington is another guy who fits into that category as well.
How about your guy, Anthony Gould? He tested pretty well.
The 5th per next gen stats. His 40 was slower than I thought it would be. I honestly thought he would crack the 4.2s. He was, per NFL Next Gen Stats, he was the 5th most athletic player at the combine, period.
Man.
Regardless of position, he was the 5th most athletic guy. So Anthony Gould blew it up. I think he would be a great option in the 4th or the 5th round as a guy to come in and return kicks and punts and to be sort of like an Isaiah McKenzie type of receiver. How about some boundary guys with speed and size? Maybe some Donovan People-Joneses like esque receivers, like some younger guys who could come in and compete with Justin Shorter. Ryan Flournoy out of Southeastern Missouri had an absolute stud of a combine after a great Senior Bowl week. And the guy I will continuously pound the table for, he gives me Donovan Peoples-Jones's vibes. Cornelius Johnson out of Michigan. I think he was underutilized at Michigan in that Jim Harbaugh, Shamar Moore offense that they have there. So Cornelius Johnson, I think, is another guy that I really like as a boundary size speed guy.
This class is great. I mean, like, this is why I think free agency.
There's a McCaffrey in this class, and we're not even talking about the McCaffrey. He looked good.
Yeah, he
looked good.
And he had a good Senior Bowl
for a quarterback transitioning to wide receiver.
Yeah,
he looked good. So I think he's gonna get overdrafted. But quick shout out to 2 more wide receivers before we go. Last year, Demario Douglas was drafted in the 6th round. He was an absolute steal. I think we're gonna be talking about either Jacob Cowing or Jaquan Jackson out of Tulane, like we talked about Jamario Douglas. Those are 2 smaller slot-ish type receivers that I don't think get enough love. So Jacob Cowing, Jaquan Jackson, I want to give those guys some love as well before we transition here to the running back position. And guess what? You know what the number 1 talking point out of Indy was when this combine was over on Saturday? Maybe this running back class doesn't suck as much as people were making it out to be, because there are some exciting running backs in this draft class, and I think some running backs that could be had at an absolute bargain. I want to start with my number 1 sleeper, and I talked about him when we did our Shrine Bowl bit after the Senior Bowl talk. I talked about him on the preview show. Isaac Guerendo. Next gen, he was the best athlete in Indianapolis this week.
Oh, yeah.
6 foot, 221, 4.3 40, 9.98 RAS. He's literally just elite in everything. Now, he's been a backup running back his entire career. Doesn't get a lot of touches. But I'll tell you what, he's an inch taller. He's 10 pounds heavier. He's slightly faster. He's slightly more explosive. But he gives me Ty Johnson vibes. And I mean that in the nicest way possible. I think he's a guy who might get overdrafted now because of his testing numbers, but you can take him in the maybe 5th round, maybe higher now because of those testing numbers. And I think he could plug and play and give you what Ty Johnson gave the Buffalo Bills here. If the Buffalo Bills gave Ty Johnson more snaps this year, he would have put up better numbers. And I think Isaac Guerendo is a guy who can come in and have a Ty Johnson-like impact. And if he gets more volume, be like a Pacheco-like guy where we're like, whoa, where'd this guy come from? He was a better pro than he was a college player.
Best 40 of all the running backs, best vertical of all the running backs, second best broad jump, only behind Jalen Wright, who I thought also did a lot to help his stock. Not necessarily help, maybe he's more of a check-the-box guy, but he's, Jalen Wright is a guy who's in contention for maybe one of the being RB1 potentially in this class. But Guerendo, it seemed like a lot of people were talking about him after this, and I was like, you know what, I know a guy who was talking about him before the combine. So but I'm
telling you guys, pay attention to the Shrine Bowl. Eric Galco does a great job getting a lot of talent. Everyone wants to talk about the Senior Bowl. I am addicted to my cell phone Shrine Bowl practice week, and I'm following all the Shrine Bowl guys, and there's some real talent that was in Vegas, and I'm mad they moved it from Vegas to Frisco, because I would have gotten credentialed and I would have gone to Vegas, but they had the Super Bowl in Vegas this year, so they moved it to Frisco. But man, a lot of talent in Frisco, a lot of talent in the Shrine Bowl. I love talking Shrine Bowl guys every year. I love finding my draft sleepers in the Shrine Bowl. I'll tell you another thing too. I've never felt more comfortable making some comps this year than I have in year past, because there are some guys who just athletically, they line up like to a T with some other guys who have had productive NFL careers. Marshawn Loyd out of USC, transferred from USC, from South Carolina to Southern California. Man, if you line him up, and Dale Jeremiah was showing this, next to DeAndre Swift, they are nearly identical. He needed to prove himself as a pass catcher in Indy because he hadn't had an opportunity to do a lot of that at USC. He proved himself, looked pretty good in the pass catching drills. Marshawn Loyd could be the first running back off the board. Trey Benson tested off the charts. If you line him up next to Jonathan Taylor, he tested better than Jonathan Taylor. Same exact size as Jonathan Taylor. Trey Benson could be RB1 off the board in the 2nd round. Blake Corum is like Doug Martin reincarnated. I love watching Blake Corum. If Blake Corum somehow slips in this class and is there in the 4th or the 5th round, it would be so tempting to add a running back like him behind James Cook. And again, one of my favorite guys in this draft class, Ray Davis out of Kentucky, formerly of Vanderbilt. He's a bigger back. if you line his Raz up next to Mike Davis, the guy that Joe Brady had in Carolina who went over 1,000 yards for Joe Brady, nearly identical, last name and all, right? And Peter Schrager was making the comments like, scouts are a buzzing about Ray Davis. Ray Davis made some money in Indy this week, and I know you like Ray Davis as well.
I do like Ray Davis. My guy Kamani Vidal tested pretty well as 4.4640. That was what I was looking for from him, right? I was like, he needs to run under 4.5 was what in
I
my
was
head.
shocked.
I did not expect him to run that fast because you put on the Troy games, like he doesn't look that fast, and he ran. But man, he's a great pass blocker. He's a good pass catcher. Like he's short. He's only 5'7".
Yeah.
But
did you see Dale Jeremiah's nickname for him?
No. What did he say?
Baby Josh Jacobs.
Baby Josh. Oh, that's a pretty good compliment.
That's a compliment. And he blew Josh Jacobs' testing numbers out of the water. He's 3 inches shorter. He's 7 pounds lighter, but that's the kind of running back that you're getting with Kamani Vidal. And he had good RAS for agility and explosion as well. So it's not just like he's some kind of like 4.46 speed guy. Like in a phone booth, he can make people miss. So Kamani Vidal made him some money this week as well. Anyone else that you liked out of that Senior Bowl, or excuse me, out of that combine class?
Well, one guy you mentioned that I was kind of on the fence about was Marshawn Loyd, and mostly that was because like I had kind of read scouting reports and like had heard that he was really a poor pass blocker, right? And that's something that kind of like turned me off like right away about him. But testing wise at the combine, I feel like he did himself some favors. That 4.46 for a guy his size. You mentioned the ability to as a pass catcher coming back. I think comparing him to the rest of the running backs in the class for a guy his size to run that 4.46 was pretty solid. So he's growing on me a bit, but again, I don't think that's someone that the Bills would necessarily be interested. I do think Vidal tested well as I just mentioned. And again, I didn't expect him to run that fast. It's not really his game, but that fact that he did certainly made things better for him.
A couple other names I want to throw out there. Audric Estime with his 4.740 was a little disappointing. Now, I think we all love Audric Estime out of Notre Dame, and if that drops him into like the 5th round range and the Buffalo Bills can pounce, I'm all for it. He's maybe just like a slower Leonard Fournette. So I'm pretty game with a guy like Audric Estime out of Notre Dame. Love his game. Keilan Robinson shocked me a little bit. I didn't think I'd like Keilan Robinson as much as I do. 4.4240 is what got me going back and looking into Keilan Robinson. 5'8", 191 pounds. He was limited offensive player at University of Texas, but guess what he's known for? And guess what he did really well in his time at the University of Texas? He was a really good kick returner, and kick returns might be making a comeback now with these new rules that are possibly being changed. And he was also a pretty good gunner at the University of Texas. So Keilan Robinson in the 6th, 7th round, that is a special teams kind of guy who maybe hasn't blossomed offensively yet. He looked really good in the pass catching drills where I was watching him. So Keilan Robinson's a name to keep an eye on. And one last name to keep an eye on, Tyrone Tracy, 4.48 at 5'11", 209. His comp on NFL.com is Bilal Powell. He's a former wide receiver. He was a wide receiver at the University of Iowa. He made the transition to running back. He added weight. He's got plenty of special team experiences. He excelled at the Shrine Bowl. So Tyrone Tracy is another guy that I really like. And then Dylan Loeb out of New Hampshire. He wowed as a pass catcher at the combine, building off a strong Senior Bowl he had. So just a couple of the running backs to keep in mind before we transition here to the offensive line. Now, the Bills met with a couple of offensive linemen that we know of in Indy. Patrick Paul, the absolute mammoth offensive tackle out of Houston. Graham Barton, the tackle moving to center out of Duke. Could be the first, not the first center off the board, but could be the second or third center off the board. And then they met with Karan Amadeji, the tackle out of Yale, projected to be a day 3 pick, sort of a prospect. Offensive line could be a sleeper pick for the Buffalo Bills. What in round 3 or round 4, it wouldn't shock me if the Buffalo Bills pulled the trigger on an offensive tackle or an offensive center, either looking for Mitch Morse's eventual successor or looking for insurance for Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown, who are pending unrestricted free agents. What do you think about that? The Bills pulled the trigger on an offensive lineman in the 3rd or the 4th round.
I think if it's a tackle, I could get on board. And the reason I say that is because we talk about the wide receiver class being really deep and being a lot of talented guys that are going to be there still in the second and third round. And I think the same can be said for tackle. And we haven't really spent a ton of time on tackle because the Bills obviously have their bookends under contract for 2024, but they're not deep, right? And we don't know what's going to come or not come for a contract extension when it comes to Spencer Brown. We certainly expect that there will be a contract extension coming for Deion Dawkins at some point, but in a really good tackle class, if the Bills have find themselves in a situation in free agency where maybe they've been able to address some of the issues on the defensive line, or maybe for some reason they've been able to get Gabe Davis back, or they were able to sign Alohi Gilman or Jeremy Chin or something, and all of a sudden tackle becomes a realistic option now in, let's say, the third round. And maybe it's a situation where the Bills find themselves in the third round and there's 3 or 4 tackles available, and they trade down like they did for James Cook in the second round 2 years ago, where they just kept trading down. And maybe that's a situation where if the Bills find themselves in that and they really like a tackle, like 3 tackles on the board, they could do that and acquire some picks and then maybe use that as ammo to move up in other rounds or move around the board a little bit more. So I could be on board. Center, I'm on the fence. You're gonna have to convince me on that one.
I got a name for you at center that we're going to talk about in a minute that I think could convince you, but there are some round 3/round 4 tackles that I think the Buffalo Bills will really like. Number one is a guy they met with at the Shrine Bowl, Garrett Greenfield out of South Dakota State. He set the offensive line record in the vertical at the combine yesterday. 6'6", 311 pounds, 33 plus inch arms. He's Spencer Brown-esque in size, but a little bit different from Spencer Brown in the fact that where Spencer Brown was very raw, Garrett Greenfield was a 6th-year senior who's played a lot at South Dakota State and really came on the last couple of years. He's a 3rd to 4th round type of guy. I think previously he was a 5th to 6th round type of guy. I think he's moved up into the 3rd or the 4th round with some of his testing in Indy. He had a good week. Roger Rosengarten out of UW, similar type. Few people really, a few people that I know and I follow who were in Indy expressed that he looked really good in drills today. He's also very sort of Spencer Brown-esque in his stature. I understand that he was cooked in the national championship by guys like Jalen Harrell. They had a field day with him. He had a bad day in the Natty, but he's a guy, left tackle, right tackle, flex, has had a pretty good career at the University of Washington. I'm not going to let one game define him. He's a pretty solid round 3-4 type of prospect that I think the Bills will sort of drift towards. And then Brandon Coleman out of TCU. He had a good RAS. He's a guard tackle type. I think a guy like Aaron Cromer will really gravitate towards a guy like Brandon Coleman, who pushed a 10 RAS today as well at the combine.
10 RAS is very appealing.
A bunch of linemen did that.
Yeah. And I wouldn't mind for the Bills to kind of like find a guy in that mold again, because they, like, Aaron Cromer was able to work some magic with Spencer Brown this past year, right? And obviously Deion Dawkins has always kind of been more of the athletic type of left tackle than the power type, right? And not saying he's like weak or anything, but like the Bills, that's kind of like what their MO has been at the bookends, right? So for me, like, that fits the mold. And if that's the case, then, you know, I would be for that, especially given that when you start talking about the middle to later rounds, you like those guys with the flexibility, like you mentioned, that guard tackle flexibility. So I do like that.
Couple of names I want to throw out before we shift over to the interior. Keilan Grable out of UCF tested pretty well. 6'6", 306. He was one of the better testers. I'm going to go back. I'm going to look more into Keilan Grable. Frank Crum out of the University of Wyoming, 995 RAS at 6'8", 313 pounds. He gives me Connor McDermott vibes, but just picture Connor McDermott with a mustache and a mullet. Like, he is a Wyoming boy through and through. Anyone who's watching this show or listening to the show, go Google Frank Crum, and you will be just bedazzled, and you will be ensorcelled by the beauty that is Frank Crum, and he will become one of your instant favorites on day 3.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, so here's a center that I think I can sell you on, Dave, taking in round 3 or round 4.
Okay.
Tanor Bortolini out of the University of Wisconsin. Here's some next-gen stats on Tanor Bortolini. Bortolini is just the 5th interior offensive lineman to record a 99 athleticism score at the NFL Combine since 2003, and the first since J.R. Sweezy in 2012. Bortolini joins Jason Kelsey as the only interior offensive lineman to have the highest athleticism score in their class. That is regardless of position. Bortolini had the fastest 3-cone ever for a center at the Combine with a 7.16, the 3rd fastest all-time among offensive linemen. Jason Kelsey was the previous high at center with a 7.22 in 2011. He comes from a prestige program for offensive linemen at the University of Wisconsin, something we know that Aaron Cromer is likens to, gravitates towards. He's a 3rd, 4th round type. I think Tanor Bortolini made a ton of money in Indianapolis on Sunday.
Just checking his weigh-ins here from the Senior Bowl, 6'3", 305. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna do some digging on this guy now that you mentioned him. So I'm putting him on my short list to research right now.
And 2 more names I want to mention. Have you heard of the magic cheat code for this NFL scouting combine for offensive linemen? Have you heard? I know Underdog Fantasy, Josh Norris is a big believer in this cheat code. Have you heard the NFL Combine cheat code?
No.
It's they call it the Moneyball cheat code. Since 2010, there have been 28 offensive linemen who recorded a 4.47 short shuttle or better at the NFL Combine. 24 of those 28 were drafted. Of those 24 who were drafted, they went on to start 84% of their NFL games.
Wow.
It's sort of like this Moneyball statistic where if someone scores below a 4.47, they magically will somehow be an NFL player and a relatively decent NFL player. 6 players did that this year.
Oh.
You had Tanor Bortolini out of Wisconsin. You had Amarius Mims, who was just an absolute freak show.
Oh my God. Yeah. That guy still.
Oh my goodness. Sure. Dominic Pooney, who I think is he's a tackle moving into guard, who's probably going to go late day 2. You had Brady Latham out of Georgia, a guard, but then two names to keep an eye on. Jarrett Kingston, the center out of University of Southern California, and a guy that you're probably pretty familiar with, Dylan McMahon, the center out of NC State, is another guy who fits that. So whether it's Tanor Bortolini, whether it's my guy Hunter Nazard, whether it's Dylan McMahon, whether it's Jarrett Kingston, I wouldn't mind the Buffalo Bills taking a center at some point in this draft. And those are, I think, the 4 guys that stick out the most to me. Bo Lemer from Arkansas is another guy I like as well, but he just tested average. He just checked boxes in Indy.
I tell you what, man, NC State, they can put out some offensive linemen too. You mentioned J.R. Sweezy. He's an NC State guy. Garrett Bradbury a couple years ago. Now we're talking about Dylan McMahon. I think that, and you're saying he fell into that Moneyball category.
Yeah.
Dylan
yes,
McMahon.
He did.
Okay.
Yes, he did. He was the number 2 athleticism score for interior offensive lineman per Next Gen Stats, and Kingston was 3rd. So McMahon raised some eyebrows for me with his combine testing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here this evening. Before we head out, we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you, if you want to support us here at Cover One, the number one way you can do so is by signing up for Cover One Pass and getting the One Pass premium membership. NFL free agency is just around the corner. Head on over to cover1.net and sign up for your very own Cover One Pass premium subscription. Each subscription is valid for 365 days, meaning it will carry you all the way through the 2024 regular season. This month's key One Pass feature is our comprehensive preview of NFL free agency. Eric, and many others have taken the time to create detailed scouting reports on players who could fit what the Bills are looking for in the market. You can find detailed scouting reports on college players anywhere. It's very rare for you to find write-ups like this on players actively in the NFL. So again, head on over to cover1.net and sign up for your very own One Pass premium subscription. I know we'll be doing a lot of draft stuff as well, and there will be some giveaways as well. Dave, do you want to quickly talk about some of the giveaways we're doing for anyone who signs up for Cover One Pass before the NFL draft?
Yeah, some pretty incredible giveaways, and I'm just seeing now this selfie that Greg has with a PS5 in tow. It is proof evidence that they are giving away a PS5 with the Cover one of the Cover One Pass giveaway. If you sign up for Cover One Pass, a Josh Allen jersey, they're giving away a Bills neon and a bunch of other more stuff. But man, that PS5 looks pretty sweet. I might have to try to sign up under a different name and try to win that thing.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Next week, we will be live Monday night at 9 p.m. reacting to the opening day of the tampering window of NFL free agency. Hopefully the news will come in by then. The Buffalo Bills have signed a couple of players. Who knows? The money is tight with the Buffalo Bills, so we might still be doing some predicting as the Bills make some moves to free up Monday by the official start of NFL free agency, which is Wednesday. But we could be reacting. We could be previewing. Either way, we're live next Monday, 9 p.m. to open up the NFL free agency window with you. Thank you so much, guys. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!